The moment the flashing blue lights hit the rear window, Deshawn already felt that familiar weight settle in his chest. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared him for what the officer said next. Officer Brooke, a white cop with a smirk that didn't match the situation, leaned into his window and whispered, "If you weren't married, I'd give you my number. I've always had a thing for black men." For a second, Deshawn didn't breathe. Not because he feared the ticket, but because the way she said black men wasn't attraction. It was ownership, like she was choosing him off a shelf. She tapped the hood of his car, smiling like she expected him to flirt back. Her badge glinted in the sun. Her eyes stayed locked on his wedding ring, and her voice dropped even lower. "Shame you're taken. I could have shown you a good time." That's when something inside him clicked. Not fear, not confusion. A cold, steady anger. He kept his tone calm. Too calm. "Am I free to go, officer?" But his thumb, hidden near the steering wheel, was already pressing record on his phone. Every word, every breath, every racist, humiliating comment she made, captured. And still, she wasn't done. As she wrote the ticket, she said loud enough for him to hear, "Black men always so interesting." Another smirk, another line, another violation of her badge. Deshawn stared straight ahead, jaw tight, heartbeat steadying. He wasn't just leaving with a ticket. He was leaving with evidence. And he already knew this wasn't ending on the side of the road. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening, and the world needs to hear them. He pulled away slowly, watching her in the mirror. The way she stared at him wasn't normal. It wasn't harmless. And somewhere deep in his gut, he felt it. This woman had done this before. And today, she chose the wrong black man. By the time Deshawn pulled into his driveway, the sun had dipped low enough to cast long shadows across the yard. He sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, replaying the officer's words in his mind. The humiliation clung to him like smoke. He tried to shake it off, but it stayed heavy on his chest. The front door opened before he even reached the steps. Aaliyah, his wife, stood there with her arms folded, not angry but worried. "You're late? What happened?" He forced a small smile. "Traffic." She didn't buy it. Aaliyah knew every shift in his voice, every breath, every pause. "Deshawn," she said softly. "Talk to me." Inside, she watched him set his keys down slower than usual. His shoulders were tense, his movements controlled, like he was holding something inside. "Did someone say something to you again?" she asked. That word, again, hit deeper than he wanted it to, because yes, it had happened before. Too many times. He took a breath and finally said, "A cop pulled me over." Her face fell. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," he said. But she crossed a line. He pulled out his phone and played the recording. Aaliyah stood frozen, her hand covering her mouth as Officer Brooks' voice filled the room. "If you weren't married, I'd give you my number. I've always had a thing for black men." Aaliyah shut her eyes, not in shock, but in exhaustion. An exhaustion only black women understood. "This is disgusting," she whispered. "She thinks she can say anything just because she has a badge." He nodded slowly. "She wasn't flirting. She was treating me like an object." Aaliyah finished. "A stereotype." He took a seat at the edge of the couch. She didn't even care. It was like she does this every day. Aaliyah sat beside him, her hand finding his. "Baby, this isn't just about today. It's about everything people like her think they can get away with." He stared at his phone, at the paused frame of the dashboard recording. "She targeted me like she targeted others," he said quietly. "I could feel it." Aaliyah squeezed his hand. "So what are you going to do?" "I'm not sure yet," he replied. "But doing nothing? That's not an option." She nodded once, firm, supportive, resolute. Whatever came next, she wasn't going to let him face it alone. That night, sleep didn't come for Deshawn. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Aaliyah rested beside him, breathing softly. His mind kept replaying the officer's tone. Too casual, too confident, too familiar. It gnawed at him. Around midnight, he slipped out of bed, grabbed his laptop, and sat at the dining table. He typed Officer Brooke plus complaints into the search bar. At first, nothing unusual came up. A photo from a local parade, a short article praising her for community engagement, a Facebook post where she posed with school kids. But then he saw a thread on a community forum. Anonymous, old, buried. A man wrote, "Pulled over for no reason. She asked weird personal questions. Made comments about my skin. Felt wrong. No name. No proof. But the feeling was identical." He clicked another thread. Another anonymous post describing almost the same behavior. The same officer. The same pattern. The same twisted interest in black men. Deshaun leaned back slowly. "This wasn't random," he whispered. "She's been doing this." He opened social media and searched deeper. Brooke's Instagram wasn't impressive, mostly selfies, gym photos, and pictures in uniform. But her likes told the real story. Posts fetishizing black men. Hashtags like in accounts filled with inappropriate jokes about experiences with black guys. It wasn't attraction. It was a fixation. One post made his jaw clench. A picture of her at a backyard party, hugging two uncomfortable-looking black men. Caption: collecting memories, he screenshotted everything. Aaliyah appeared behind him in a robe, rubbing her eyes. "You're still up?" "I found something," he said quietly. "She's done this before. More than once." Aaliyah looked at the screen, reading the captions, the comments, the pattern. "This is sick," she said. "She's using her badge to get close to men she fetishizes." "Exactly." He clicked another link. This one led to a private Facebook group. Public enough to preview, private enough to hide inside. A space where women joked about collecting certain types of men. And there she was, Brooke, laughing in the comment section. Deshaun felt his stomach tighten. This isn't just harassment. This is systematic. Aaliyah placed a hand on his shoulder. "Baby, you can't let this slide. There are other men she targeted who couldn't fight back. But you have evidence." He nodded slowly. For the first time since the traffic stop, the fear and humiliation shifted into something sharper, something colder. Purpose. Deshaun closed the laptop. "Tomorrow," he said, "I make the first move. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe." The next morning, Deshaun didn't waste a second. As soon as Aaliyah left for work, he dialed the one person who never backed down from a fight. His cousin Kareem, a civil rights investigator known for exposing police misconduct in Atlanta. Kareem picked up on the second ring. "Yo, cuz, you good?" "No," Deshaun replied. "Listen, something happened yesterday." When he finished explaining, there was a long silence. Then Kareem said, "Send me everything, right now." Deshaun forwarded the traffic stop recording, the screenshots, the forum posts, the Instagram evidence. Within minutes, Kareem called back. "Damn, she's not just unprofessional. She's a predator with a badge." "I know," Deshaun said, "and she's not hiding it." Kareem exhaled sharply. "All right, listen, we don't confront her. We expose her, but we do it smart." They spent the next hour building a plan that didn't rely on anger or impulse, but on precision. Kareem explained, "People like her always escalate. Her ego won't let her leave you alone. She thinks black men are supposed to be flattered. She'll message you. She'll slip up. That's when we get her." Exactly as he finished speaking, Deshaun's phone buzzed. A new text from an unknown number. He opened it. His jaw tightened. "Good morning. Handsome thinking about you. That ring doesn't have to stop us." Deshaun read it twice, anger building with every word. "She got my number from the system," he muttered. "Of course she did," Kareem replied. "She's abusing her access. Keep it. Screenshot it. This is gold." Deshaun saved the text. Another buzz came in seconds later. Men like, "You always play hard to get. I'll see you around." The phrase hit him like a slap. Men like you, a category, a fetish, not a human being. "That's it," Kareem said. "She's already crossed multiple lines." We need something airtight, something that exposes her publicly, not privately. What are you thinking? Deshaun asked. Simple, Kareem said. We set the stage. We let her walk into it. And when she does, the whole city will see who she really is. Aaliyah came home early that afternoon and walked in on the two men crafting the strategy. She listened quietly, absorbing every detail. Then she stepped forward and said, Whatever you two are planning, make sure it's something she can't twist, something she can't escape. Deshaun nodded. We're going to end her pattern, once and for all. The plan was in motion, and Officer Brooke had no idea she was taking the bait already. They filed a complaint the next morning. Malik sat at the intake desk and spoke slowly, so every word would be recorded. The woman behind the glass typed as he spoke. He handed over screenshots, texts, and the recording from his car. The clerk looked up with a face that tried to be neutral but failed. We'll open an internal review, she said. Malik watched her write the words and felt neither relief nor victory. He felt the weight of an institution that had to be forced to act. Within 2 days, the story leaked. A neighborhood activist posted a short clip of Malik's, recorded with a caption that read, Officer flirted while ticketing. This is abuse of power. The clip went from a few hundred to thousands of views overnight. Local reporters called. The police department released a statement promising a thorough and impartial review. That line had become a ritual. Malik had learned to treat public relations statements like wallpaper, meant to be read and ignored until pressure made them real. Marcus coordinated the next moves. He called contacts at the Civil Rights Commission and the local reporters who had shown interest. He made sure every piece of evidence had a timestamp and a witness if possible. He reached out to other men Malik had found in online threads. Some answered, some did not. Those who did agree to meet gave testimony that matched Malik's story. An officer who used charm as a weapon, who leaned on the badge to turn curiosity into conquest. The department opened an investigation. They interviewed officers and examined body cam footage. At first, their timeline seemed slow. Papers moved across desks. Supervisors claimed they had never seen complaints that rose to this level. That is how institutions protect themselves. They rely on pace and procedure to suffocate urgency. Marcus knew this. He also knew how to use attention as leverage. Social media and local news kept the story alive. A volunteer group organized a small rally outside headquarters. People held homemade signs. A local pastor spoke about dignity and respect. The chief of police could not ignore the crowd and the cameras. Private conversations that had once been comfortable for the department turned awkward. People who had laughed at the officers' jokes in the break room began to avoid her eyes. Then the FBI showed up. They had been watching because the complaint hinted at broader abuses. Federal agents asked questions that went beyond a single ticket. They asked about patterns, officers who appeared repeatedly in Malik's screenshots, and messages that included names and dates. When Marcus handed over the printed conversations the fake account had provoked, the agents leaned forward. Their interest sharpened. What looked like an isolated incident was beginning to resemble a network. The department responded by suspending the officer while the investigation continued. She protested her innocence on social media. Her lawyer demanded privacy and claimed defamation. Her supporters called the complaints an overreaction. The noise rose on both sides. But the suspension sent a clear message. The institution could no longer pretend nothing had happened. More victims came forward. One by one, they told similar stories. Each new testimony tightened the net. Marcus compiled a timeline that connected messages, stops, and social posts. He handed it to investigators and to a local journalist with a reputation for tenacity. The journalist published an in-depth article that showed the pattern plainly. People who had once dismissed small offenses now read a long list of repeated abuses, each one reinforcing the next. Pressure changed the balance of power. Where authority had once shielded the officer, attention and documentation exposed her. An institution defined by hierarchy and silence was being forced to respond to evidence laid bare in the light. The officer's colleagues began to worry about their own names on the pages. The chief convened a meeting with city lawyers. The department prepared for a public reckoning. Malik sat through every step. He watched the system creak and shift around him. He had not wanted spectacle. He wanted accountability. When the city announced a formal inquiry and promised cooperation with federal agents, Malik felt a small, careful satisfaction. The fight was far from over. But for the first time since the traffic stop, the badge did not speak for the officer. Evidence did. 3 weeks later, the city auditorium filled with over 200 people. The police department had organized a community trust transparency forum, a public event meant to calm the outrage growing online. Officers lined the walls, reporters crowded the aisles, and residents filled every seat. What no one knew was that today would be the day everything broke open. Deshaun, sitting quietly in the fourth row with Aaliyah beside him, kept his eyes on the stage. Kareem sat to his left, legs crossed, a folder of evidence resting on his lap like a loaded weapon. The atmosphere buzzed with tension, but the sharpest edge was reserved for the moment Officer Brooks stepped onto the stage. She walked out confidently, wearing full uniform, chin raised, forcing a smile like she was about to give a harmless community speech. Her supporters clapped. Everyone else stayed silent. "Thank you all for being here," she began, voice too soft, too polished. "It's important that we build stronger relationships with our diverse communities. Respect and openness." Kareem leaned toward Deshaun and whispered. "Get ready," Book continued. "As officers, we do our best to maintain professionalism. Is that so?" A voice boomed from the audience. Every head turned. Deshaun stood up. Brooke froze mid-sentence. Her eyes widened. Recognition hit her face like a slap. Deshaun stepped toward the aisle microphone, phone in hand. "You talk about professionalism," he said steadily, "but this is what you said to me during a traffic stop." He pressed play. Her voice echoed to the auditorium speakers, dripping with arrogance. "If you weren't married, I'd give you my number. I've always had a thing for black men." Gasps rippled across the room. A few people covered their mouths. Others muttered angrily. Brooke's face turned pale. "That's out of context," she stammered. But Kareem was already rising. "Oh, then let's give them the full context." He handed the event moderator a USB. The screen behind Brooke flickered to life, displaying screenshots of her text messages she sent to several black men, Instagram comments fetishizing chocolate men, group posts from the Facebook community where she joked about collecting experiences, timestamps matching forum complaints. Every image hit harder than the last. Brooke tried to run toward the podium controls, but 2 internal affairs officers stepped in front of her. The audience grew louder, angrier. Reporters took pictures at rapid-fire speed. The city officials on stage looked like they were witnessing a building collapse. Then an FBI agent, previously seated near the back, approached the stage holding a federal document. "Officer Brooke," he said firmly, "you're coming with us." The room erupted, not in chaos, in justice. Aaliyah squeezed Deshaun's hand. He didn't smile. He simply watched a woman who had humiliated so many finally face the consequences she never thought would reach her. 6 months later, spring sunlight poured through the windows of Deshaun's home office. The city felt calmer now. His life had found rhythm again. The nightmares from that traffic stop had faded, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. Aaliyah walked in holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You're up early again," she said. "Couldn't sleep," he replied with a small smile. "Got another email last night." She raised an eyebrow. "Another one?" "Yeah," he said. "A man from Charlotte. Same kind of traffic stop. Same kind of comments. He saw our story. He wants help." Aaliyah sat beside him, sliding a comforting hand over his shoulder. "You're becoming the person people turn to." "I never wanted that," he said softly. "I just wanted her stopped." He clicked through the news feed on his screen. Officer Brooks' trial date had been set. Several officers she communicated with were also under investigation for misconduct and data misuse. The department had implemented new oversight rules. Community leaders, black leaders, had been invited to help build them. Brooke herself had vanished from social media after her arrest. Every image of power she once flaunted was now replaced with mugshots circulated by local channels. Aaliyah looked at her husband's face, noticing he wasn't angry anymore, just thoughtful. You okay? Yeah, I just didn't expect all this. One recording changed everything. And you made sure it counted, she reminded him. He leaned back in his chair, closing his laptop. Maybe that's the real lesson. We don't win by shouting. We win by showing the truth. Aaliyah smiled softly, and you showed it loud enough for the whole city to hear. He stood and looked out the window. Cars passed. Neighbors walked their dogs. Kids played on the sidewalks. A normal day. A safe day. A day that existed because he chose not to stay silent. Deshawn took Aaliyah's hand. What Brooke tried to do, she thought she could reduce me to some fantasy. Instead, she exposed herself. Aaliyah squeezed his fingers. And she'll never hurt anyone like that again. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it